My name is Priya Anand. I am 38 years old. And on the evening of the Meridian Children's Foundation annual gala, a black tie event attended by 412 people in the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel in downtown Chicago, my mother walked to the center of the stage, took the microphone from the emcee's hand without asking, and began to tell the room that she was disowning me. She got through approximately 40 seconds of it before the keynote speaker walked on stage. The keynote speaker was Dr. Evelyn Marsh, pediatric oncologist, recipient of 3 National Humanitarian Awards, the woman whose name was on the foundation's letterhead, whose face was on the gala program, whose 2-minute introduction had just been read by the MC moments before my mother had intercepted the microphone. Dr. Marsh walked to the center of the stage, placed one hand gently but with absolute authority on my mother's shoulder, took the microphone back, and said to the room, "Before we continue, I would like to introduce the person without whom none of what you see tonight would exist. The architect of everything this foundation has become over the last 6 years. Our CEO, Priya Anand." 412 people turned to find me. I was standing at table 7 near the east wall of the ballroom, in the navy blue gown I had bought 3 weeks earlier for exactly this evening, holding a glass of water I had forgotten I was holding. My mother was still on stage. She was looking at me with an expression I had been receiving in one form or another for my entire life, the expression that meant I had once again managed to exist in a way that contradicted her preferred version of reality, and she was not yet sure what to do about it. I set down my water glass. I walked to the stage. I took the microphone from Dr. Marsh's hand, and for the next 11 minutes I gave the keynote address I had written over 3 weeks and rehearsed 17 times in my bedroom at 6 o'clock in the morning, the address that outlined the foundation's work over the past 6 years. The 2,300 children we had served, the 14 partner hospitals, the $17 million in grants we had administered, the endowment we had built from $0 to $31 million, and the expansion we were announcing that evening into 4 new cities. My mother stood at the side of the stage for the first 3 minutes. Then she walked off. The room gave me a standing ovation. I know this sounds like the kind of detail a person adds for effect. I am telling you because it happened. This is that story. To understand the gala, you need to understand the family. And to understand the family, you need to understand my mother, Sunita Anand, 62 years old, born in Pune, India, immigrated to the United States with my father in 1983, raised 2 daughters in a suburb of Chicago with the specific ferocity of a woman who has crossed an ocean and is not going to let the crossing be for nothing. My mother is not a villain. I want to be clear about this from the beginning, because the story does not work if you make her a villain. She is a woman who loves her children with a completeness that is also a confinement. A woman who has a clear and detailed vision of what a good life looks like and who has spent 38 years trying to install that vision in me with the dedicated urgency of someone who genuinely believes she knows the correct answer and cannot understand why the other person keeps choosing wrong. The correct answer, in my mother's framework, was always the same. Excel academically. Attend a good university, good meaning medical or engineering. Become a doctor or an engineer. Marry an appropriate Indian man from an appropriate family within an appropriate window of time. Have children. Maintain proximity to the extended family network. Perform the expected roles with the expected competence and the expected visibility. This was not cruelty. This was love, expressed in the architectural language of a woman whose own mother had expressed love the same way, in a culture where the architecture of a respectable life is not a suggestion but a load-bearing wall. I was the daughter who kept putting windows in the load-bearing walls. I was excellent at school, genuinely excellent, the kind of student whose teachers remembered her 10 years later. The kind of person who reads for pleasure and argues for sport and finds ideas genuinely more interesting than social performance. I got into Northwestern on a merit scholarship. My mother was proud. This was the last stage at which my choices and her vision were in alignment for an extended period. At Northwestern, I studied sociology and nonprofit management. My mother had expected pre-med. We had a phone call in October of my freshman year that lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes and ended with my mother saying, "You are throwing your life away for feelings," and me saying, "I will call you Sunday," and both of us hanging up without resolution, which was the pattern we would follow for the next 20 years. The unresolved conversation that we would return to again and again, circling the same disagreement, neither of us ever quite landing. I graduated, went directly into a master's program in nonprofit administration at the University of Chicago, and spent the following 4 years years working at two mid-sized Chicago nonprofits where I learned the mechanics of program management, donor relations, grant writing, financial stewardship, and the specific unglamorous labor of keeping a mission-driven organization alive when the world has no structural obligation to fund it. I was good at this work. I was not good at it in the way of someone who has found their passion and glows with it. I was good at it in the way of someone who has found the place where their specific set of capabilities produces the most meaningful output per unit of effort, which is a quieter kind of fit but a more durable one. My mother, during these years, expressed her opinions about my career in the consistent and creative ways available to a mother who has opinions. She compared me to the daughters of her friends. Neha Sharma's daughter was completing her residency in internal medicine. Priti Patel's daughter had married an engineer and was expecting her second child. Ritu Mehta's daughter had just been promoted to associate at a law firm. These were offered not as attacks but as weather reports. This is the climate. This is what is growing around you. Why are you not growing this way? I received these reports with the patience I had developed over years of receiving them and filed them in the same place I had been filing them since college, which was a drawer I had labeled not useful, and returned to infrequently. The marriage question was its own sustained chapter. I dated. I was not reckless about it, but I was not strategic about it either. I dated people I was interested in, on my own timeline, without the apparatus of family-arranged meetings that my mother periodically attempted to assemble. I dated a man named James for 2 years who was kind and intellectually engaging and not Indian, which produced a specific genre of phone call from my mother that I will not reproduce in full here, but that contained the sentence, "I did not come to this country for this," delivered with a sincerity that I took seriously even as I declined to let it govern my decisions. James and I ended things mutually and without drama in my early 30s, for reasons that had nothing to do with my mother. I did not meet anyone after that whom I wanted to build a permanent structure with, and at some point I stopped treating this as a problem to be solved and started treating it as simply the shape of my life, which had other features that occupied it fully. The Meridian Children's Foundation began as an idea on a Thursday afternoon in January when I was 31 years old. I was sitting in the oncology waiting room of a children's hospital on the north side of Chicago where I had been volunteering in a patient navigation capacity, helping families understand the logistical and financial landscape of pediatric cancer treatment, and a woman sat down next to me with a folder of papers and a child on her lap, and a look on her face that I recognized from the dozens of families I had sat with in that room. The look of a person who is trying to hold too many things simultaneously and has run out of hands. Her name was Daria. Her son's name was Marcus. He was 4 years old. His treatment was proceeding well medically. The financial architecture of that treatment was not proceeding well at all. The family was from Rockford, roughly 90 miles from the hospital, and the cost of travel, temporary housing, lost wages, and the 100 small expenses that accumulate around a medical crisis the insurance paperwork does not cover had put them in a position that she described quietly, while Marcus slept on her shoulder, as, "I don't know what we do next." I helped Daria find 3 emergency assistance programs that afternoon. I helped her fill out the applications. I came back the following week to check in. Marcus finished treatment 11 months later. He is 9 years old now. He drew me a picture of a dog last Christmas and mailed it to the foundation office, and I have it framed on my wall. The afternoon with Daria was not the beginning of the idea because ideas do not actually begin in single moments. They begin in the accumulation of moments that finally reach a threshold. But it was the moment I could point to. The moment the accumulation tipped into intention, and the intention became a plan, and the plan became the thing I did next with every unit of professional energy I had. I spent 8 months developing the framework for what would become the Meridian Children's Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to comprehensive family support for pediatric cancer patients, specifically addressing the logistical, financial, and emotional infrastructure that clinical treatment does not provide. I researched the landscape, identified the gap, wrote the program model, secured the initial funding commitments, recruited a founding board that included Dr. Evelyn Marsh, who had been working with pediatric oncology families for 20 years and understood the gap better than almost anyone alive, and filed for 501c3 status in the fall of my 32nd year. I told my mother about the foundation when I launched it. I told her in the same phone call I told her about leaving my previous position to run it full-time. She was quiet for a long time, which with my mother is never neutral. Silence is a weather condition, and this particular silence had the specific pressure of a woman choosing between several responses and selecting the least explosive one available. She said, "So you are giving up a salary to run a charity?" I said, "I am leaving a salaried position to lead an organization I founded." She said, "Priya, who will take care of you?" I said, "I will take care of me. I have been taking care of me." She said she would pray for me. This was not a comfort. It was a verdict, delivered in the language of concern. For the next 6 years, my mother and I existed in the same sustained pattern that we had always existed in, now with an additional dimension. She attended family events. I attended family events. We talked on Sundays. She asked about the foundation in the tone of someone asking about a hobby they hope has run its course. "How is the charity going?" And I answered in the tone of someone who has learned to report in without expecting understanding in return. She did not come to any of the foundation's public events. She was not hostile, precisely. She was absent in a way that communicated something about what she considered worth showing up for. The accumulation continued, as accumulations do. By the time I was 37, the foundation had become what I described in that gala keynote. 2,300 children served, 14 partner hospitals, $17 million in grants administered, a $31 million endowment, an expansion into 4 new cities. It had also become, in the world that tracked these things, something notable. We had received national press coverage. We had been recognized by 3 government agencies as a model program. Dr. Marsh had won a humanitarian award whose acceptance speech had named me and the foundation explicitly. I had been written up in 2 industry publications and given a feature interview on a podcast that had approximately 400,000 listeners. My mother did not mention any of this to me. She continued to ask, "How is the charity going?" in the same tone every Sunday, as though none of the accumulation existed or had landed. I continued to answer in the same way. We continued to exist in our pattern. And then came the engagement. My cousin Sanjay, my mother's sister's son, 2 years younger than me, an engineer from Naperville, thoroughly excellent in the specific ways that my mother had always held up as the standard, got engaged to a woman named Anita, who was a physician, and announced that the engagement celebration would include a large extended family gathering in Chicago in the same week as the gala. My mother expected me to be present at every event of the engagement weekend. I explained that I would attend the Saturday family dinner, but that on Friday evening I had an unavoidable professional commitment. My mother asked what commitment. I said the foundation's annual gala. My mother said the gala could wait, that family came first, that Sanjay's engagement was a once-in-a-lifetime event. I said, patiently, that the gala was also a once-in-a-year event at which I would be delivering the keynote and announcing a major organizational expansion, and that my absence was not possible. The conversation escalated in the way that our conversations had been escalating for 20 years, but with a new intensity, because there was now the engagement as backdrop. The implicit comparison, the unspoken but audible implication that Sanjay was doing life correctly and I was still, at 38, doing it wrong. My mother said things in that conversation that had been building for a long time. She said I had always prioritized strangers over my family. She said my choices had brought shame. She said she did not know how to explain me to people anymore. She said, and this is the sentence that I think was the sentence she had been carrying toward for years, "Sometimes I think you are not my daughter." I said, "I know you don't mean that." She said, "Don't tell me what I mean." I said, "I will see you Saturday evening." I hung up. She came to the gala. I did not know she was coming to the gala. She had not told me she was coming. She had not bought a ticket. Tickets were $500 per person for the general reception, with a table sponsorship structure above that. My mother did not buy a ticket. What she did was arrive at the Harrington Hotel at 7:15, 30 minutes after the reception began, and tell the event coordinator at the door that she was looking for her daughter, that there had been a family emergency and that she needed to be let in immediately. The event coordinator, a young woman named Bree, who had been with us for 2 years and was excellent at her job, had let her in out of concern because the word emergency in a context involving someone's mother reads as genuine because it was meant to. My mother moved through the reception. She did not find me immediately because I was in a side room with Dr. Marsh and 2 of our board members doing a final review of the expansion announcement. She located a family friend, Mrs. Kapoor, who was attending the gala legitimately as a table sponsor, and she sat with her. She had a glass of wine. She waited. The program began at 8:30. The MC welcomed the room, gave the land acknowledgement, introduced the foundation's mission, and began the opening remarks that led into the keynote introduction. This was the moment I had been building toward for weeks. The expansion announcement was the largest news we had produced as an organization, and the keynote was the vehicle for it, and I had written every word of it with the specificity you bring to something that matters. The MC began the introduction. He said my name, he said my title. He described in the 2-minute block I had given him what I had built over 6 years, and my mother stood up. I want to be precise about the sequence because I think the precision matters. She stood up from her seat at table 3 where Mrs. Kapoor was sitting. She walked to the stage. She walked with the purposeful, unhurried confidence of a woman who has decided something and is following through, which is a quality I recognize in her because it is a quality I recognize in myself. She stepped up the side stairs. The MC, who was mid-sentence, looked at her with the expression of a person who does not understand what is happening but does not yet know whether to be alarmed. My mother held out her hand for the microphone. The MC, in the confusion of the moment, gave it to her. She said, "Excuse me. I am Sunita Anand. I am this woman's mother." She paused. The room was completely quiet. "I want to say in front of all of you that Priya has broken this family's heart for 20 years. She has chosen strangers over her own people. She has refused every good thing we offered her. She has..." That was 40 seconds. That was when Dr. Evelyn Marsh walked on stage. Dr. Marsh is 61 years old. She is 5 feet 4 inches tall. She has white hair cut short and the posture of someone who has spent 30 years in a field that requires you to hold your spine straight in the presence of the worst things that happen to children. She is not a person who needs volume to occupy a room. She placed her hand on my mother's shoulder, not grasping, not forceful, simply present, the way you place your hand on something to indicate that a thing has changed, and she took the microphone and she introduced me. I will tell you what I felt walking to that stage. Not triumph, not the satisfaction of a reversal, not the pleasure of a moment going right after many moments going wrong. What I felt was the specific emotion that exists at the intersection of being seen and being steadied. The feeling of someone standing beside you in a way that confirms, without drama, that you are not what you have been told you are, that what you have built is real, that the room full of people who have supported this work and believed in this mission and funded this cause are there because of something you actually did. Dr. Marsh had not planned that introduction in those terms. She had simply arrived on stage at the correct moment and told the truth with the authority of someone who had been watching me tell it for 6 years. I gave the keynote for 11 minutes. I told the room about Marcus, the 4-year-old boy from Rockford, in the first minute without using his name. I told them about the gap between what clinical excellence can provide and what families actually need when a child has cancer and the whole structure of daily life has collapsed around a diagnosis. I told them what we had built to fill that gap. I told them where we were going. I told them about the 4 new cities and the partnership model and the endowment target for the next 3 years and the specific, measurable outcomes we were committing to in the expansion. I did not mention my mother. I did not look at the side of the stage. I looked at the room, at 412 people who had come to this building on a Friday evening in formal wear because they cared about children with cancer, and I gave them what they had come for. I want to stop here and speak to you. Because what I have described so far is the public part, the part of the story that fits in an 11-minute keynote and a ballroom moment. What I want to tell you about now is the private part, which is harder to describe and more important. There is a particular kind of pain that belongs exclusively to the child who has been loved wrongly, not unloved. Loved, genuinely, fully, completely loved, but loved in a way that requires you to be a different person than you are in order for the love to be comfortable. A way of being loved that is also a sustained instruction to change, to shrink in certain directions and grow in others according to a blueprint you did not draft and were not consulted on. A way of being loved that carries inside it the unspoken premise that who you actually are is the problem. My mother loved me. I have never doubted this. I doubt it at 11 o'clock at night sometimes, in the specific hour when the things you hold away during the day come closer. But in the morning, I know it again. She loved me with everything she had, and she spent 20 years trying to redirect that love toward a version of me that would cause her less worry and more pride. And the tragedy of it, the specific tragedy that is not anyone's fault and is still a tragedy, is that she could not see that the version of me she was trying to redirect love toward was not a better version. It was simply a version she recognized more easily. It fit the map she had been given. It would have caused her less anxiety and produced me less purpose, and I was not willing to make that trade, and the cost of not making it was 20 years of her looking at me with the expression I described at the beginning of this story. The expression of a woman who cannot reconcile the daughter in front of her with the daughter she intended. The gala was that expression, given a microphone and a room of 400 people. It was not a new thing. It was the old thing, amplified, made visible, brought into a space where it could not be contained in a Sunday phone call. My mother did not calculate that evening. She did not plan a public humiliation. She arrived in that ballroom in pain, the pain of a woman who loves her daughter and has never been able to reach her. And she did what people in pain do when they have not learned other tools. She made her pain loud. I understood this before I walked on stage. I am telling you I understood it because I think it is important, and because the understanding is what made it possible for me to give that keynote without collapsing into the emotion of the moment. I had been carrying the shape of my mother's pain for 38 years. I knew its contours. I was not surprised by it, even amplified, even public, even on the one evening I had most needed it to stay quiet. I walked on stage with the understanding that I was carrying two things at once, the organization and the mother, and I gave the one what it needed, and I held the other until later. The evening concluded. The expansion announcement was covered the following week by 2 national publications and 1 local television segment. The foundation received 23 new donor commitments in the 48 hours following the gala, several of which were attributed by the donors themselves to the speech. Dr. Marsh sent me flowers on Saturday morning with a card that said, "You built this. Remember that it was already built before last night." I kept the card in my desk drawer where I could read it at the times I needed to. My mother and I did not speak that Friday night. She left the ballroom before the program ended, with Mrs. Kapoor in a silence that I could feel at the other end of the room even though I could not see her leave. She did not come to Sanjay's Saturday dinner. She went home to her house in the suburb where I had grown up, and she did not call me. I called her on Sunday. The regular Sunday call, the one we had been having every week for 20 years, the one that had never been comfortable and had never been stopped. I called at 10 in the morning, my usual time. She picked up after 3 rings. She did not apologize. I want to be honest about this because a story like this invites the expectation of a clean resolution. The moment of remorse, the tearful acknowledgement, the transformation that makes the preceding chapters feel worthwhile. My mother is not a woman who apologizes quickly. She apologizes the way she does everything else, slowly, partially in a language that is not quite the direct language of apology, but that contains, if you know how to read it, something that is trying to be one. What she said on that Sunday call was, "I watched some of the program online. Mrs. Kapoor sent me the video." A pause. "Those children, what you do for those families." Another pause, longer. "I didn't know it was like that." I said, "I know," she said. "I should have come before." I said, "Yes." She said nothing for a while. I let her say nothing. We had been having Sunday calls for 20 years, and I had learned, slowly and with effort, how to let my mother's silence be what it was, not a continuation of the argument, but a form of processing. She processed slowly. She processed in private. She processed in the specific way of a woman who has built a very ordered interior world and does not let things in quickly. But when they are in, they stay. She said, "The standing ovation." I said, "Yes." She said, "Your grandfather would have been very proud." I sat with that for a moment. My grandfather, my mother's father, a man named Ravi Subramaniam, a schoolteacher from Pune who had believed without question in education as the highest available form of human dignity, had died when I was 26. He had visited us in Chicago when I was a child and had spent 3 days asking me questions about what I was learning and listening to my answers with the full and unhurried attention that I have spent my adult life trying to replicate in the way I listen to the families we serve. He had been my mother's father, and he had also somehow been more like me than she was. She was telling me something in that sentence. She was doing it in the only way available to her at that moment. I said, "Thank you, Mom." She said, "Don't thank me. I made a fool of myself." I said, "You made a mistake. It's different." She said, "Is it?" I said, "Yes." We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary things. My cousin Sanjay's fiancé, what she had cooked that week, the weather in her suburb. At the end of the call, she said, "Priya." I said, "Yes." She said, "Send me the information about the foundation. The real information. The reports or whatever you have. I said I would. She said, I want to understand it properly. I sent her the annual report, the impact summary, the program overview, and the expansion announcement document. She read all of it over the following week. She called me on the following Sunday and asked 3 specific questions about the hospital partnerships, about how the endowment was structured, about what the family navigation program actually looked like on a day-to-day basis. I answered all 3 in detail. She listened in the way my grandfather had listened to me as a child, fully, without interrupting, with the particular quality of someone who is updating a belief rather than defending one. She asked, on the 3rd Sunday after the gala, if she could come to the foundation's office. Not to an event, not to a public occasion, just to the office, to see the work, to meet the people, to understand what she had not understood for 6 years. She came on a Tuesday morning in November. She was there for 2.5 hours. She met my program director, my development team, 2 of the hospital liaisons who had come in for a meeting. She sat with a family navigation coordinator named Gina for 40 minutes and listened to Gina describe what the role involved: the calls with frightened parents, the insurance paperwork, the emergency housing, the travel logistics, the moments when a family that had been holding on lets go for a moment and needs someone there to hold the space. My mother listened to all of this without speaking, and at the end she shook Gina's hand and said with the directness that is the quality she and I share most completely, "You are doing God's work." On the way out, she stopped in the doorway of my office. She looked at the framed drawing on my wall. Marcus's dog, Crayon, slightly lopsided in the way that 4-year-olds draw dogs because they see dogs with the whole of their imagination rather than just their eyes. She looked at it for a long time, then she looked at me, and she said something that I have been carrying since that Tuesday morning with the same care I bring to the things I know I will keep forever. She said, "I spent so much time worrying about whether you would be taken care of." She paused. "I didn't see that you were too busy taking care of everyone else." I did not say anything. There was nothing to add to it. It was accurate and it was honest, and it had cost her something to say, and I let it stand in the room between us the way things that are both true and hard deserve to stand, without being qualified or rushed toward resolution. She hugged me at the door. She held on for a moment longer than the hugs she had given me my entire life, and I let her, and I held on too. We are not fixed. I want to say that honestly because I think the expectation of a fixed ending is one of the lies that stories tell, and I have too much respect for you to tell it. My mother still has opinions about my life. She still mentions Sanjay's engagement and Priti Patel's daughter and the shape of a life she considers more complete than mine. She still calls every Sunday. She is still the same woman she has always been, a woman who loves with a strength that is also a pressure, who wants for me what she can picture and sometimes cannot picture what I have built because it was never on the map she was given. But she comes to the gala now. She came this past year and sat at a table she paid for herself, a table sponsorship, $5,000, written on a check in her precise accountant-trained handwriting with the memo line that said, in her complete and unironic sincerity, "For the children." She sat at that table for the entire program, and at the end she stood with the room when the room stood. We are not fixed, but we are in motion, and motion, after 20 years of the same circuit, is its own form of miracle. I want to say one more thing before I close, and I want to say it directly to anyone watching this who is the person in their family who has been told, in one form or another, that what they have chosen is wrong, that the life they are building is insufficient, that the love they are giving to something beyond the family is a subtraction from the family rather than an addition to the world. What I know, what 6 years of sitting with families in waiting rooms has taught me at a depth that no other experience has reached, is that a life organized around contribution is not a life that lacks. It is not a consolation prize for the life that was supposed to happen. It is not a substitute for the relationships and connections and warmth that a complete life requires. It is the thing itself. It is what a life is for. My mother could not see that because her map did not have it. I spent 20 years being angry about the map. Then I spent a few years understanding where the map came from. Now I spend my energy on the territory, on the work, on the families, on the 2,300 children who have moved through this organization and the thousands more who will come after them. On the Marcus, who is 9 years old and sends me drawings of dogs and is alive because people showed up for his family in the right way at the right moment. That is the life I have. That is the life I chose. And on a Friday evening in November, in a room of 412 people, with my mother standing at the side of a stage she had no business being on, and Dr. Evelyn Marsh standing at its center with a microphone and 30 years of witness behind her eyes, that life introduced itself to the room, and the room stood up for it. I walked off the stage that night and into the rest of my evening, and I did the work of the organization, and I thanked the donors, and I spoke to the families who attend the gala every year as our guests, the parents and the siblings and the children in varying stages of treatment and recovery, who are the reason every person in that room is there. I talked to a 7-year-old girl named Amara who had just completed her last round of treatment and who was wearing a red dress and a crown made of plastic gemstones that she had acquired, her mother told me, from a machine at the hospital gift shop for 50 cents, and who told me with the total conviction available only to 7-year-olds that she was going to be a marine biologist when she grew up because sharks were the most interesting animal and nobody gave them enough credit. I told her I completely agreed. She gave me a high five and went back to her table. I stood there for a moment in the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel, in my navy blue gown, in the room my organization had filled, and I thought about my grandfather asking me questions when I was a child, and listening to my answers with full and unhurried attention, and I thought about the map my mother was given, and the territory I had chosen, and I thought about Amara and her crown and her sharks, and the life that was ahead of her, whole and full and available, and I thought, this is exactly where I am supposed to be. My name is Priya Anand. I am 38 years old. I am the CEO of the Meridian Children's Foundation. My mother grabbed a microphone at my gala, and I watched Dr. Evelyn Marsh take it back. And the next morning at 10 o'clock, I called my mother as I always do, because the call is not about agreement. It was never about agreement. It was always about the fact that she is my mother, and I am her daughter, and we are still here, still on the line, still figuring out how to see each other correctly. We are still working on it. So are the sharks. Apparently they are very misunderstood. Thank you for being here with me for this one. We will see you tomorrow on Revenge Chronicles.